Welcome to the History and Heritage podcast with me, Liam Blake. Join me as we uncover hidden stories and insights that shaped our world. From mysteries to legacies, join us on this journey through time. People cling to their ancient names. That was John O'Donovan, writing in 1837 as he tramped the roads of Ireland, gathering stories, collecting folklore, and recording place names for the Great Ordnance Survey. His notebooks are full of insights, sometimes grumpy, sometimes lyrical, but always sharp. And when he came to County Longford, to the parish of Meathas Troim, or Edgeworthstown as it was officially called, he noticed something. No matter what names landlords or surveyors imposed, the people still clung to their older words, their older identities. And that really is the key to Edgeworthstown, or Mostrim. A town of two names, two souls if you like. One name, Edgeworthstown, brought in with a family from Middlesex in the 1500s, tied to land grants, plantation and ownership. The other, Mostrim, from Meathas Troim, going back to the Gaelic past, with meanings that conjure the land itself, the fertile ridge, or the frontier of the elder tree. One name imposed from the outside, the other rising from within. And the thing is, they both still live. On the bypass sign, you'll see Edgeworthstown. At the GA pitch, you'll hear Mostrim shouted with pride. But before we even get to that tug of war over identity, let's start at the very beginning. Long before the Edgeworths, long before plantations, this was a settled and spiritual place. The earliest roots we can trace lie somewhere between the 6th and 9th centuries. That's when a small Christian community was founded here, linked to a Catholic saint called Beat, or Beatus. Like many early Irish saints, he's a shadowy figure, but the memory of him lingered. A church rose here, one of countless dotted across the Midlands, anchoring local life. Imagine it, a timber church, perhaps, with wattle walls and thatch, surrounded by a little graveyard, the centre of a parish long before the word parish even existed. By the 13th century, this was O'Farrell territory. The O'Farrells, or O'Freels, were the great lords of Annally, as Longford was then known. They resisted Anglo-Norman pressure for centuries. Their power was expressed not just in castles, but in patronage of religion. Moving then to the 15th century, they established a Franciscan friary at Abbeylands, just outside what would become Edgeworthstown. That friary was the heart of community and devotion here. Friars praying, bells ringing, and townsfolk gathering for feast days. And then came the Reformation. In 1539, Henry VIII's commissioners reached Longford. They dissolved the friary at Abbeylands, tore down its buildings, and seized its lands. For the people here, it must have been a brutal shock. Their spiritual home suddenly gone, their local saints and friars scattered. But that was only the beginning. Within a generation, a new wave arrived. Settlers from England sent to reorder Irish landholding under the Tudor crowd. Among them were two brothers, Edward and Francis Edgeworth. They came in the 1580s, at the very tail end of Elizabeth's reign, and they were part of the broader push of plantation. Edward went into the Church of Ireland and became a bishop. Church of Ireland, if people don't know, the equivalent to the Church of England. Francis stayed closer to the levers of power in Dublin, working as the clerk of the First Fruits and later as clerk of Crown and Hanaper, a post that controlled legal documents and carried serious influence. And in 1619, Francis Edgeworth received a grant from King James I, 600 acres of land at what was then known as Mostrim. That land had belonged to the O'Farrells. Now it passed into the hands of the Edgeworths. This was the start of the family's local dominance. From that point, the name Edgeworthstown began to take hold, at least in official circles. But, as John O'Donovan said, 2 centuries later, people cling to their ancient names. Among neighbours, kin and farmers, it was still called Mostrim. The 17th century tested everyone in Ireland, and Edgeworthstown was no exception. In 1641, rebellion broke out, and the countryside went up in flames. Locally, Cranley Castle, one of the Edgeworth residences, was attacked. It was destroyed. Mary Edgeworth, the wife of John O'Shane Edgeworth, only just escaped with her life. Their son was captured, though he was eventually smuggled out to Dublin. Armies marched and counter-marched throughout Longford, burning, plundering, and taking what they wanted. By the 1670s, the dust had settled a little, and Richard Edgeworth had put up the first version of Edgeworthstown House. From then on, the manor dominated the town, both physically and socially, and by 1682, writers were describing Mostrim, a very good country town, also called Edgeworthstown. The duality of names was already, by 1682, already fixed. The 18th century, so the 1700s, brought new stability and new ambitions. Richard Edgeworth, who inherited in 1719, consolidated the estate, paid off debts, and began to work on a more substantial manor house in the 1720s. This was the foundation for what stands today. From this line of the family came two men whose names echo far beyond Longford. First, Henry Essex Edgeworth, born in the rectory here in 1745. His father converted to Catholicism and moved to France, where young Henry was educated for the priesthood. In Paris he rose to prominence, and when the French Revolution toppled the monarchy, it was Henry, now known as Abbé Edgeworth, who was chosen to accompany Louis XVI to the guillotine. On that January morning in 1793, as the king mounted the scaffold, it was Abbé Edgeworth who whispered the words, "Fils de Saint Louis, montez au ciel," son of Saint Louis, ascend to heaven. From Mostrim to the guillotine, the local and the global entwined. The other was Richard Lovell Edgeworth, born here in 1744. He was the archetype of the Enlightenment squire, restless, inventive, and full of schemes. His house bristled with contraptions, springs so that doors wouldn't slam, a central heating system, and even a pump in the farmyard that dispensed coins if beggars kept it going for long enough. He experimented with farming techniques, reclaimed bog, and built machines. He also established a school here, drawing in 500 pupils at its height, and attracting attention from educators across Europe. In politics, he stood out as a landlord willing to buck the trend. In 1801, when Parliament was asked to vote on the Act of Union, Richard Lovell Edgeworth voted no, despite being offered enough money for his vote to secure his family's finances for a generation. But perhaps the greatest figure, or most well known anyways, was his daughter, Maria. Born in 1768, she moved to Edgeworthstown as a teenager and spent most of her life there. It was in this house, in this small Longford town, that she wrote Castle Rackrent in 1800, a novel that exposed the foibles and failures of the Anglo-Irish landlords with biting humour and realism. It was hugely successful, and even admired by Jane Austen, who said she liked no novels but Maria's and her own. Sir Walter Scott himself came here in 1825 to pay homage. Wordsworth visited in 1829. Maria was, for a time, the most famous novelist in Europe and perhaps the world. She wasn't just a writer. After her father's death in 1817, she took over management of the estate. She dealt with tenants, balanced accounts, and tried to act as a responsible landlord. During the famine of the 1840s, already in her 70s, she threw herself into relief efforts. She distributed food, turf, and clothing, trying to keep her tenants alive through those desperate years. For her, writing and life were not separate. Both were about responsibility, about realism, and about the lives of ordinary people. Meanwhile, the town itself was evolving. The market house, designed by James Bell and completed in 1829, stood proudly in the centre of the main street. Maria sold her jewellery to help fund it, showing just how important markets were. These were the lifeblood of rural communities, farmers selling butter, cattle and oats, neighbours exchanging news, political rumours spreading from mouth to mouth. The building still stands, a reminder of those bustling days. Transport also transformed the town. In 1815, Bianchini's stagecoaches began to run, and Edgeworthstown was one of the staging posts. Then, in 1855, the railway arrived. Suddenly, this small Longford town was on the main Dublin to Sligo line. The impact was immense. For traders, it meant new markets. For emigrants, it meant an easier escape to Dublin, Liverpool, or even America. The station became the gateway to both opportunity and loss. How many farewells were said on its platform as sons and daughters left for good? The town's graveyards whisper their own stories. At St. John's, among many others, lies Isola Wilde, Oscar Wilde's beloved sister. She died here in 1867 at only 10 years old while staying with relatives. Oscar, devastated, came to the graveyard, spending long hours in grief. From that loss came one of his most haunting poems, Requiescat. It's a reminder that Edgeworthstown is tied not just to the Edgeworth family, but also to wider threads of Irish literary history. The 20th century started to bring further change. In 1935, during the Cultural Revival, the local council voted to rename the town officially as Mostrim. For nearly 40 years, that was the name you would see on documents and signs. Then, in 1974, it was changed back to Edgeworthstown, partially because that was how the wider world knew it, through Maria Edgeworth and her fame. Yet the two names never cancelled one another out. They continued in parallel. Even today, both are used, sometimes in the same conversation. Industry shifted too. In 1969, Albert Reynolds, the later Taoiseach, founded C&D Foods here. What began as a local enterprise grew into one of Europe's biggest pet food manufacturers. It provided jobs and stability and kept families rooted here when so many other rural towns were hollowing out through emigration. In its own way, C&D was important to Edgeworthstown's survival in the late 20th century, as the market house had been in the 19th. And what of the house itself, the great Edgeworthstown House? In 1939, it was donated to the Sisters of Mercy, who converted it into Our Lady's nursing home. Much of the old interior was already altered, but the house still stands, a physical reminder of centuries of family life, invention, and writing. Today, heritage has come full circle. The Maria Edgeworth Centre, opened in the old schoolhouse in 2019, celebrates the literary legacy, the family, and the town. Visitors walk the Edgeworthstown Literary Trail, seeing the sites connected with Maria, with Scott, with Wordsworth, and with Wilde. The GAA pitch keeps the name Mostrim alive, shouted in victory and defeat alike. And John O'Donovan's words still echo. People do cling to their ancient names. So, what do we learn from all this? Edgeworthstown, or Mostrim, is more than just a dot on the map. It is a microcosm of Ireland. Gaelic roots reaching back over 1,000 years, plantation and confiscation in the 17th century, Enlightenment experiment in the 18th, literature, famine, railway and emigration in the 19th, national revival, industry, modernisation in the 20th. And now, heritage, tourism and pride in the 21st. Two names, one town. One imposed from the outside, the other growing from within. Both true, both alive, and both telling us that history is never just one story, but many layered together. And in Edgeworthstown, Mostrim, these layers are still visible and still audible.